Chapter 1. The King. The tale of the Mahabharata unfolds with a ruler named Shantanu. One day, while wandering through a forest beside the banks of river Ganga, he encountered an enchanting woman emerging from the waters. Captivated by her beauty, the king found himself irresistibly drawn to this mysterious figure and sought to learn more about her. In response to his inquiry regarding her identity, the woman questioned his intent. Shantanu declared his status as the king of Hastinapur and professed his deep love for her, expressing a desire to marry her. The woman agreed to his proposal but stipulated two conditions that must be met. Intrigued yet apprehensive, the king urged her to state her requirements. She outlined her first condition. He must never inquire about her origins or identity. The second condition required that while he could observe her actions, he must never interfere or question them. The woman warned that should he violate either condition, she would leave him. Though taken aback by such demands, Shantanu was overwhelmed by his feelings and willingly consented to her terms. They then returned to the palace where they wed. Chapter 2. The Queen. As time passed, the queen gave birth to a son, filling the king with immense joy. Eager to celebrate, he hurried to her chamber, but confusion washed over him when he saw her carrying the newborn towards the river. His heart sank as he watched her place the child into the water, allowing the currents to carry him away. Horrified, the king felt an urge to cry out, but he was reminded of his vow to the queen to observe her actions without interference or question. He was left speechless. After this harrowing event, the queen returned to the palace and life continued. Eventually, she bore a second son. In his joy at the birth of this new child, the king had managed to forget the tragedy of his first son. However, once again, as he approached her chambers, he witnessed the same heart-wrenching scene. The queen carried the baby to the river and let it wash away in the water. Once more, despair filled the king's heart, yet he could do nothing, bound by his promise. This grim pattern continued for several years, repeating itself with each of the 5 subsequent sons. Finally, an 8th son was born. The queen, as was her custom, carried the child towards the river, but this time the king could no longer contain his anguish. He shouted for her to stop, his voice filled with desperation. "Stop! I won't allow this to happen again." The queen halted and turned to face him. "But you promised," she reminded him gently. Overcome with emotion, the king replied, "I don't care. I can't bear it anymore. I have watched 7 of my sons perish. I will not let you take this child too." The queen smiled, yet there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "Very well, dear king. According to our agreement, I must now depart. However, before I go, I shall reveal my secret. I am Ganga, the goddess of the river. The 8 children born to you are celestial beings, Vasus of the heaven. They once angered a great sage, who in retaliation cursed them to live as humans and endure the suffering of mortal life. 7 of these Vasus repented and sought mercy, and the sage, moved by their pleas, shortened their human lives. Yet, the 8th Vasu remained defiant and as a result was condemned to experience a long and painful existence in this world. This 8th child is the 8th Vasu. I will take him with me and prepare him, teaching him the skills and resilience necessary to face the trials ahead. I promise to return him to you once his training is complete." With that, Ganga disappeared, taking the child with her. The king stood by the river in a stunned silence for a long while before returning to the palace, his heart heavy with sorrow. Chapter 3. The 8th Son. Years after the departure of the queen and his son, Shantanu found himself wandering along the banks of the river Ganga. He often returned to this place, reflecting on his lost queen and son, haunted by the tragedy of the 7 children he had seen drowned in the waters. His heart had been heavy with sorrow throughout these years. On this particular day, his attention was caught by a young boy playing with a bow and arrow near the riverbank. There was something intriguing about the boy that drew the king closer. As Shantanu approached, he was met by the radiant figure of goddess Ganga, emerging gracefully from the river. "Greetings, dear king," she said. "In accordance with my promise, the time has come to return your son to you. He has completed his training." Over the years, she had taken the boy across many realms, where he learned from the greatest teachers. He had mastered responsibilities of kingship and the intricacies of political science. He had been educated in ancient scriptures as well as in mental and spiritual disciplines. He possessed knowledge of the duties of priests and had been trained in advanced warfare. Moreover, Ganga revealed that he had been bestowed with celestial weapons from the king of the gods. "I have named him Devavrat," she said, looking fondly at the boy. "Go to your father, my son, and bring him joy." With that, Ganga vanished, her duties fulfilled. Shantanu was filled with overwhelming joy at the return of his son and heir. Over the years, Devavrat demonstrated remarkable wisdom and valor, proving himself time and again. He single-handedly defeated an invading army and earned the affection of all in the kingdom. While Shantanu swelled with pride for his son's achievements, he still felt the deep ache of loneliness in the absence of Ganga, missing her presence dearly. Chapter 4 Bhishma. One day King Shantanu beheld a beautiful woman named Satyavati by the banks of the river Ganga. Having experienced years of loneliness, he yearned for companionship. The woman was the daughter of a fisherman, and Shantanu sought the fisherman's permission to marry her. However, the fisherman was a shrewd negotiator. "I will agree to this marriage, dear king," he said, "but only if my daughter's sons are made the heirs to the throne." Shantanu was taken aback by this request. "But Devavrat is the crown prince of Hastinapur. I cannot alter that," he replied firmly. The fisherman insisted, "Then I cannot permit this marriage." Reflecting on the past, Shantanu remembered how he had blindly accepted conditions before, leading to the loss of his 7 sons. This time, he resolved not to be so reckless with his heart. He turned down the proposal and returned to the palace, feeling deeply saddened. Noticing his father's distress, Devavrat inquired with the council about the source of his sorrow. Upon learning of the woman his father had encountered, he decided to speak directly with the fisherman. "My father is in love with your daughter. Please allow the marriage," Devavrat pleaded. The fisherman replied, "As long as you remain the crown prince, my daughter's sons will have no chance at the throne of Hastinapur." Devavrat declared, "Then I will renounce my claim to the throne. I will do anything to bring joy to my father." The fisherman cautioned him, "But your sons will always have a claim to the throne, which could lead to a conflict for my grandchildren." Devavrat made a solemn vow. "In addition to giving up my right to the throne, I also promise to remain a celibate for my entire life." At these words, the heavens opened up, showering him with flowers. From that moment on, he was known as Bhishma, meaning the one who took a terrible oath. With the fisherman's consent, Bhishma brought Satyavati to his father on a chariot, where he informed Shantanu of his vow. The king was devastated by the severity of his son's decision. However, Shantanu decided to bestow a special gift upon Bhishma in recognition of his sacrifice. He granted Bhishma the extraordinary ability to choose the time and place of his own death, effectively rendering him nearly immortal. Soon after, Shantanu married Satyavati, and together they had 2 sons. Chapter 5 The 3 Princesses. Upon the passing of King Shantanu, the sons he had with Satyavati ascended to the throne as per their agreement. The firstborn son was crowned as the new king of Hastinapur. Tragically, however, he met his end in a battle before he could produce any heirs. With the death of the first king, the second son was appointed as the king, but being still a child, Bhishma took on the role of a regent. As the young king grew, Satyavati and Bhishma decided it was time for him to marry and secure an heir. The king of Kashi was hosting a contest for suitors to choose amongst his 3 daughters, inviting all eligible kings and princes. But due to a prior dispute, Hastinapur was notably excluded from the invitation. Feeling insulted, Bhishma, with Satyavati's permission, set off for Kashi to win the princesses for his brother. Once there, he gathered the three princesses, Amba, Ambika, and Ambalika, into his chariot and issued a challenge to the other suitors, declaring that they would have to defeat him to reclaim the brides. The assembled kings and princesses gave chase, but none could match Bhishma's skill in battle. Among them, King Shalva pursued him for the longest duration and fought with great determination to win back the princesses. Bhishma ultimately destroyed Shalva's chariot, leaving him humiliated but choosing to spare his life. Having successfully secured the three princesses, Bhishma returned to Hastinapur to offer them to the young king. However, the eldest princess Amba confided in Satyavati that she was in love with King Shalva, the very suitor who had chased them. Understanding her feelings, Satyavati requested Bhishma to allow Amba to return to Shalva, and he graciously consented. Unbeknownst to them, Amba would play a crucial role in Bhishma's life in the years to come. The remaining two princesses, Ambika and Ambalika, were married to the young king. Unfortunately, the young ruler fell ill and passed away before he could leave behind any heirs. This left Satyavati deeply troubled, as the kingdom now faced the dire prospect of being without a lineage. She turned to Bhishma, urging him to take the throne and to marry his brother's widows. "Mother," he said, "you know better than anyone of my vow to never claim the crown and to remain celibate throughout my life. I cannot break this oath." With this in mind, Satyavati pondered another solution to the dilemma they faced. She decided to unveil a secret she had held for many years. Chapter 6. Vyasa. Before her marriage to Shantanu, Satyavati encountered a sage named Parashar, with whom she bore a son named Vyas. Like his father, Vyas was a revered sage endowed with immense spiritual powers and wisdom. With the kingdom in need of an heir, and Bhishma bound by his vow of celibacy and renunciation of the throne, Satyavati called upon Vyas to address their dilemma. He had promised his mother that he would always be available to help her in times of need. Satyavati explained the unfortunate circumstances surrounding her son's death before he could produce heirs with his two queens. As the half-brother of the deceased king, Vyas had the right to father heirs with the queens. Vyas willingly agreed to fulfill his duty. Ambika was the first queen to be sent to Vyas's chambers. However, when she beheld him, she was struck by his hideous appearance. In horror, she closed her eyes throughout. Afterwards, Vyas informed his mother that while Ambika would conceive a strong and capable heir, he would be blind from birth. Next, Ambalika was summoned to Vyas. Upon seeing him, she turned pale with fright. Following the completion of the blessing, Vyas conveyed to Satyavati that Ambalika would bear a brave son, but he would be pale in appearance and suffer from jaundice throughout his life. Dissatisfied with these outcomes, Satyavati directed Ambika to return to Vyas's chambers for another blessing, determined to have a healthy child without any disabilities. However, Ambika, unwilling to face Vyas again, devised a plan. She dressed her handmaiden in her attire and sent her in her place. The handmaiden approached her duties with courage and detachment, unlike the two queens before her. After the blessing, Vyasa proclaimed, "You will bear a son who will be wise, diplomatic, and learned. He will elevate you from your life as a handmaiden." With that, Vyasa completed his task and vanished. Ambika later gave birth to a son named Dhritarashtra, who was blind. Ambalika's son was named Pandu due to his pale complexion. The third son born to the handmaiden was named Vidur and was considered the most perfect of the three. As the boys matured, Pandu was appointed king despite being the second born, as Dhritarashtra was deemed incapable of ruling due to his blindness. Vidur was given the position of prime minister. In a bid to secure the kingdom's future, Dhritarashtra was arranged to marry Gandhari, the princess of Gandhar. Upon learning of her husband's blindness, Gandhari chose to wear a blindfold from the day forth so that she could share in his experience of the world. Pandu was married to Kunti, a princess from the Yadava dynasty. Yet, Bhishma advised Pandu to take a second wife from the Madra kingdom to further strengthen their empire. Thus, Pandu wed Princess Madri as a second wife. However, Kunti held a secret, one that would eventually shake the foundations of the kingdom of Hastinapur to the core. Chapter 7 Kunti. In her youth, Kunti's household was graced by the visit of a great sage. Impressed by Kunti's devoted care and attentiveness, the sage gifted her a mystical mantra before departing. This powerful mantra had the ability to summon any celestial deity, allowing Kunti to receive their blessing for a child. Intrigued and filled with youthful curiosity, Kunti decided to test the mantra. With a sense of innocence, she recited it to summon Surya, the sun god. As promised, Surya appeared, bestowing upon her a radiant child who glowed with brilliance of the sun and wore a golden chainmail across his chest. However, once the wonder of the moment faded, Kunti was engulfed by panic. As an unmarried young girl, she felt utterly unprepared for the motherhood and feared the judgment of her family and society. In a moment of desperation, she placed the infant in a basket and set it afloat on the river Ganga, praying for a compassionate soul to find and raise the child as their own. Years later, Kunti became the queen of Hastinapur alongside Madri, Pandu's second wife. When King Pandu returned from a successful campaign, he took his two queens on a trip into the forest, leaving Dhritarashtra in charge as king. One day, while hunting, Pandu shot an arrow into the bushes, mistakenly believing he had spotted a deer. Tragically, the arrow struck a mystical rishi who was accompanied by his wife. With his dying breath, the rishi cursed Pandu, declaring the moment he touched his wives with desire, he would meet an untimely death. Devastated, Pandu realized that without heirs, his lineage and the future of his kingdom were at risk. Determined to ensure the continuation of his line, Pandu decided to remain in the forest, extending Dhritarashtra's responsibilities as king. He discussed the dire situation with Kunti, who revealed to him the mantra that the sage had bestowed upon her. Overjoyed by this revelation, Pandu encouraged her to use the mantra to summon their heirs. "Which deity should I invoke first, my lord?" Kunti asked. "Invoke Dharma, the god of justice. This will ensure that our eldest son is blessed with righteousness." Kunti recited the mantra, and Lord Dharma appeared, granting her a son who they named Yudhishthir. Pandu, eager for more children, instructed Kunti to invoke Vayu, the lord of the wind, so their second son would possess great strength and power. After Kunti chanted the mantra, Vayu blessed her with a son named Bhim. Pandu's excitement grew as he expressed his desire for a third son, who would be the most glorious and formidable among men. For this child, Kunti invoked Lord Indra, the king of the heavens, and thus Arjun was born. Recognizing the importance of lineage, Pandu then asked Kunti to teach the mantra to Madri so she too could have children. Kunti complied, and after learning the mantra, Madri invoked the Ashwin Kumaras, the twin deities. They gifted her twin sons, named Nakul and Sahadev. Thus, the 5 sons born to Kunti and Madri came to be known as the Pandavas. Meanwhile, in Hastinapur, Gandhari became increasingly aware of the children born to Kunti and Madri, igniting a deep yearning within her for children of her own. Chapter 8 Gandhari. Upon learning about the children born to Kunti and Madri, Gandhari felt an overwhelming longing for her own children. Despite the passage of many years, she had not conceived. In her moments of despair, her heartfelt prayers seemed to be answered when Vyasa appeared in Hastinapur, seeking food and shelter. Gandhari welcomed him with open arms, tending to his every need, and her devoted care impressed the sage. Seeing her dedication, Vyasa asked her to name her reward. With unwavering determination, Gandhari expressed her desire. I wish for 100 strong sons, Vyas promised her, and so you shall have it, before vanishing from the sight. Shortly after this encounter, Gandhari fell pregnant, but 2 years passed without the arrival of her children. Frustrated and desperate, she struck her belly with a stick, an act that unexpectedly triggered labor. To her horror and that of her handmaidens, she gave birth not to a child, but to a solid mass of flesh resembling an iron wall. Heartbroken at this grim outcome, Gandhari commanded her attendants to dispose of it. At that moment, Vyasa reappeared and instructed, "Stop, I will prepare what needs to be done." He proceeded to create 100 pots, carefully breaking the mass of flesh into equal portions, placing each piece into a separate jar. During this process, Gandhari's longing deepened, and she silently wished for a daughter as well. Seeing her thoughts, Vyasa assured her, "The last bit of flesh will produce your daughter." Eventually, the first son emerged from one of the pots, wailing as his lung filled with air. The wild animals outside Hastinapur responded with cries, and the winds howled violently while fierce fire broke out around the kingdom. This firstborn son was named Duryodhan. One by one, his 99 brothers followed suit, emerging from their jars, until finally their sister Dushala was born. These children came to be known as the Kauravas. Dhritarashtra felt immense gratitude to finally have heirs. Yet he was acutely aware that Yudhishthir, the son of King Pandu, would inherit the throne, not his son Duryodhan. This awareness brewed jealousy and resentment in Dhritarashtra's heart, setting the stage for a fierce rivalry that would ultimately lead to a cataclysmic clash between the Pandavas, the son of Pandu, and the Kauravas in years to come. Chapter 9. Return to Hastinapur. Pandu found solace and happiness in the forest, living alongside with his 2 wives, Kunti and Madri, as well as his 5 sons. This tranquil existence, however, was shattered one fateful day when Pandu, momentarily forgetting the curse of the Rishi, succumbed to desire and touched the arm of his beloved wife Madri. The curse was swift in its vengeance. In an instant, Pandu fell to his death. Madri, overwhelmed by grief and unable to bear the loss of her husband, chose to take her own life. This tragedy left Kunti as the sole parent of the 5 Pandava brothers. With a heavy heart, Kunti resolved to return to her family to the palace of Hastinapur. Upon their arrival, they were welcomed back, but not everyone in the family shared the same joy upon their return. Yudhishthir, the eldest son of the Pandavas, was the rightful crown prince. Yet, Dhritarashtra, blinded by his ambitions for his eldest son Duryodhan, yearned for the throne. Queen Gandhari's brother Shakuni further fueled the growing animosity between the Kauravas and the Pandavas, intensifying the rift within the family. Despite these tensions, a semblance of harmony was achieved, and Bhishma took it upon himself to train the princess in their royal duties and martial skills. As time passed, a fierce rivalry developed between Duryodhan and Bhim. Bhim, known for his immense strength, often bested the Kaurava brothers in wrestling matches, humiliating them in front of their peers. Meanwhile, Arjun, gifted in the arts of warfare, excelled in all forms of combat training. One day, while playing in the fields, the princes found themselves in a predicament where their ball fell into the bottom of the well. In his attempt to retrieve the items, Yudhishthir accidentally lost his ring as it slipped from his finger and fell into the depths alongside the ball. As the young princes struggled to devise a plan to recover their possessions, an archer happened to pass by. Observing their plight, he collected reeds from the surrounding area and skillfully shot the first reed into the ball. He continued this method, shooting subsequent reeds into the end of the previous one, eventually forming a long chain that reached the top of the well. With this clever device, he was able to pull out the ball. Next, the archer removed an arrow from his quiver, recited a mantra, and shot the arrow into the well. To the prince's astonishment, the arrow returned, bearing Yudhishthir's lost ring. Overjoyed, the princess invited the archer to accompany them back to the palace to meet their granduncle Bhishma. As they walked, the archer concealed a mixture of sadness and a deep seated desire for revenge in his eyes, hinting at a future that was yet to unfold. Chapter 10 Drone. Upon hearing about the prince's encounter with the mysterious archer in the woods, Bhishma immediately recognized that this must be the legendary Drona. Drone had just returned from the disheartening meeting with King Drupad, which had left him feeling humiliated. In his youth, Drone had been close friends with Drupad. The two had shared a great bond, and Drupad had promised Drone that when he ascended to the throne, he would share his kingdom with him. However, years had passed, and Drone's future had taken a downturn. Now married, with a young child to support, he struggled to provide for his family, despite his exceptional skills as a warrior. Desperate, Drone travelled to Panchal to remind his friend Drupad of his childhood promise. When he approached the king, Drupad laughingly dismissed Drone's plea. "Kings cannot be friends with those who are poor and powerless," he proclaimed. The court echoed his laughter, leaving Drone feel humiliated, embittered, and furious. As he left the palace, he stumbled upon the princess attempting to retrieve their ball from the well. Demonstrating his exceptional archery skills, Drona captured the prince's admiration. They quickly introduced him to Bhishma, who recognized Drone's talent and appointed him as the instructor for the princess. Grateful for this opportunity, Drona eagerly accepted, seeing it as a way to resolve his financial struggles. He dedicated himself wholeheartedly to training the princess in the art of warfare. Among the students, Bhim and Duryodhan displayed remarkable prowess with the mace, while Yudhishthir excelled with the spear. Nakul and Sahadev proved their skill with the swords. However, it was Arjun who captured Drone's admiration, quickly becoming his favorite student. One day, Drone devised a challenging exercise. He set up a wooden bird in a tree and instructed the princess to aim for its eye. Before allowing them to shoot, he asked each prince, what did they see? Yudhishthir responded, "I see the bird, the branch, and the tree." "No good," replied Drona, instructing him to step aside. The other young princes offered similar responses until it was Arjun's turn. "What do you see?" asked Drona. "I see only the eye," Arjun replied confidently. He drew his bow and let his arrow fly, striking the eye of the wooden bird dead on the target. As the princes owned their skills, Drona soon requested his Guru Dakshina, the traditional fee paid by a student to their teacher. "What is it that you desire, master?" Arjun asked earnestly. "Bring me King Drupad," Drona replied. Determined to fulfill this task, the princes set off on their mission. With their unique abilities and Drona's expert training, they quickly overcame Drupad's guards. By the following day, they had captured Drupad and brought him to Drona's feet. Addressing Drupad, Drona said, "Once you claimed only a king can befriend another king. I sought your kingdom so I could earn your friendship, and I have succeeded. But now that you are no longer a king, I shall return you half of your kingdom." Drupad, forced to accept the terms, smiled tightly, but the humiliation would linger in his memory, and the two former friends, now adversaries, would one day find themselves on opposing sides of a great war, their fates forever intertwined in the unfolding saga of their lives. Chapter 11 Deadly Rivals. Upon Kunti's return to Hastinapur with her 5 Pandava sons, not all was met with joy. With the passing of the king Pandu, the responsibilities of the throne fell to Dhritarashtra until Yudhishthir, the eldest son of Pandu, reached maturity. This situation created palpable tension between the two sets of cousins, the Pandavas and the Kauravas. The Pandava children consistently outshone the Kauravas in intelligence, learning capabilities, and physical prowess. Among the Kauravas, Duryodhan, the eldest, quickly recognized the significant threat posed by Bhim, who particularly excelled in strength and athleticism. Bhim frequently wrestled the Kaurava brothers into submission, humiliating them in various competitions of strength. This only deepened Duryodhan's hatred for Bhim, leading him to seek a way to eliminate his rival. One day, Duryodhan suggested a trip to the banks of the river Ganga for all the cousins. The day unfolded with much merriment, but when the opportunity arose, Duryodhan took a sinister step. He poisoned Bhima's food, knowing fully well that his cousin's voracious appetite would lead him to consume it all without any hesitation. As the day came to a closure and the cousins returned to the palace, Bhim, unaware of the treachery, fell into a deep coma near the river bank. Seizing the moment, Duryodhan tied Bhim's hands and feet and rolled him into the river, abandoning him to drown. He then returned to the palace, feigning ignorance about Bhim's disappearance. When Yudhishthir noticed Bhim was missing, he inquired about his brother's whereabouts, but no one had any answer. Meanwhile, Bhim sank deeper into the river, surrounded by the Nagas, or serpent beings, who began to bite him mercilessly. However, in a twist of fate, their venom counteracted the poison in his system, and Bhim awoke. Breaking free from his bindings with ease, Bhim seized the Nagas and hurled them against the river bed in a display of his formidable strength. The terrified Naga swam to Vasuki, the king of the Naga realm, to report the incident. Upon realizing that the mighty young man was the son of Vayu, the wind god, Vasuki invited Bhim into the Naga palace. To aid in Bhim's recovery, the Naga king presented him with pots of Rasakunda, a potent potion renowned for enhancing strength. Bhim consumed 8 vessels of this nectar, and soon after he fell into a deep sleep. Once rejuvenated, the Naga king returned him safely to the surface. When Bhim returned to the palace, he recounted his incredible tale to Kunti and his brothers, much to Duryodhan's astonishment. Yudhishthir, suspicious of Duryodhan's involvement in Bhim's near demise, felt a nagging doubt but lacked any evidence to confront him directly. Realizing the depth of their cousin's malice, the Pandava brothers understood that they would have to exercise greater caution in their dealings with Duryodhan in the days to come, setting the stage for an escalating rivalry between the two families. Chapter 12. The Son of the Sun. Once Drona completed his training with the young princess, Bhishma organized a grand contest to showcase their remarkable skills to the kingdom. The first competition featured a fierce face-off between Duryodhan and Bhim, who showcased their prowess in mace fighting. Their duel quickly escalated to a point where it seemed that they were on the verge of a life and death battle. It was only the timely intervention of Ashwathama, Drona's son, that prevented a tragic outcome. Following this intense round, it was time for Drona's star pupil, Arjun, to take the stage. Arjun dazzled the audience by shooting arrows into the ground, igniting flames that danced upon the earth. He then fired arrows into the sky, summoning rain that extinguished the fire, showcasing his mastery over the 5 elements of earth. In a spectacular display of skill, Arjun rendered himself invisible, leaving the crowd roaring with excitement and admiration. As the applause thundered in the stadium, Drona addressed the crowd with pride, declaring, "Behold, the greatest archer of our time. There is none who can match his skill." Just then, a mysterious figure emerged in the arena, commanding immediate attention. "Guru Drona, Arjun is not the greatest archer. I am," the young man proclaimed boldly. The audience fell into stunned silence, eager to see who this boastful challenger was. In a breathtaking demonstration of archery, the young man matched Arjun's prowess shot for shot, stunning everyone with his exceptional talent. Drona, curious about the newcomer, asked, "Who are you, young man?" The challenger said, "I am Karna, and I challenge your star pupil to a contest to the death." Arjun, momentarily taken aback, responded, "To challenge a prince, you must be of royal blood. What kingdom do you hail from?" Karna remained silent, unwilling to reveal his lineage. In the audience, Duryodhan, recognizing Karna's potential, took the initiative. "Guru Drona," he said, "I hereby crown Karna as the king of Anga, effective immediately. This should satisfy any requirement for the contest against Arjun." Amidst the cheers, a charioteer in the crowd burst into tears of joy, exclaiming, "My son, I am so proud of you. You now have a kingdom. Observing this turn of events, Bhishma inquired about Karna's parentage. Who are your parents, young man? The old man replied, O great Bhishma, I, Adiratha, am the adopted father of Karna. Bhishma curiously said, The son of a charioteer cannot challenge a royal prince. Who are your real parents? He pressed. Karna's expression darkened with anger and frustration. He had no knowledge of his true lineage, and thus no rights to contest against the royal family of Hastinapur. With this revelation, the contest was called off, but Duryodhan recognized Karna's potential as a formidable ally, one who could rival even Arjun, the most skilled of the Pandavas. Yet, amidst the crowd, one heart was heavy with grief and recognition. Kunti, watching from afar, wept as she realized the true identity of the young man before her. He was her firstborn son, the one she had secretly placed in a basket and set adrift on the river many years ago, the son she had conceived with Surya, the sun god. Her emotions surged as she recognized Karna as her long-lost child. Chapter 13 The House of Fire. As the years passed, Yudhishthir's reputation amongst the citizens of Hastinapur flourished. Renowned for his wisdom, righteousness, and impeccable conduct, he captured the hearts of the people, who eagerly wished to see him ascend the throne as their new king. Under mounting pressure from his council, King Dhritarashtra formally appointed Yudhishthir as the crown prince, a decision that incensed Duryodhan, who coveted the crown for himself. Duryodhan's resentment was rooted in the history of his family. Although his father Dhritarashtra was the eldest of the Kuru dynasty, his blindness disqualified him from ruling, allowing his younger brother Pandu, the father of the Pandavas, to be crowned the king. After Pandu went into exile, Dhritarashtra had resumed the responsibilities of the throne, and following Pandu's death, due to a curse, his reign was extended. Now, as Yudhishthir approached maturity, Dhritarashtra's time as a king was drawing to a close. Duryodhan believed that the crown should naturally pass to him, as he was the eldest son of Dhritarashtra. Feeling concerned by the unfolding events, Duryodhan devised a sinister plan to eliminate the entire Pandava family. An upcoming 5-day festival in Varnavat, a region under Hastinapur's dominion, presented the perfect opportunity. Duryodhan approached his father with a proposal. Father, since Yudhishthir is the crown prince, it would be fitting for him to represent the royal family at the festival. In fact, it would be wonderful for the entire Pandava family to accompany him. They would enjoy the sights and sounds of Varnavat and have a splendid holiday. Dhritarashtra, despite having suspicions about Duryodhan's true intentions, agreed to the proposal, secretly wishing for his son to be the next king instead of Yudhishthir. Thus, he appointed the Pandava family as the royal representatives at Varnavat for the festival. Though Yudhishthir was very wary of the situation, he ultimately consented to fulfill his royal duties. Unbeknownst to them, Duryodhan had commissioned a grand mansion to be constructed for the Pandavas in Varnavat. However, he instructed the builders to use lac, a highly flammable material for construction. One of the builders, loyal to Vidur, the Prime Minister, learnt of Duryodhan's treacherous plans. He discreetly sent word back to Vidur, alerting him to the dangers of the mansion's construction. In turn, Vidur cautioned Yudhishthir to remain vigilant as they prepare for their journey to Varnavat. Upon their arrival, the Pandava brothers and their mother Kunti settled in their new mansion. The first 4 days of the festival passed without any incident, and they relished the celebrations and attractions surrounding them. However, on the 5th night, disaster struck. The mansion suddenly erupted into flames, engulfing the structure in a raging inferno. The people of Varnavat watched in horror, fully believing that no one could have survived such a catastrophic blaze. Chapter 14 Deadly Sanctuary. During their time in Varnavat, the Pandavas and Kunti remained vigilant against Duryodhan's potential treachery. Upon arriving at the mansion constructed for them, Yudhishthir detected the strong odor of lac, a highly flammable substance. Fortunately, their uncle Vidur had forewarned them about the dangers. Although Duryodhana had commissioned the mansion, some of the builders were loyal to Vidur and had secretly created an escape tunnel beneath the structure. That night, the Pandavas and Kunti slept in the mansion's basement. On the final evening of their stay, Yudhishthir organized a ceremonial dinner, inviting Duryodhana's key accomplices. Once the Brahmins departed, the accomplices were entertained, unaware of the plans unfolding behind the scenes. When the festivities concluded, the Pandavas and Kunti slipped down to the escape tunnel. Bhim set the house on fire as they made their getaway, and Vidur had arranged for their transport across the river and into the safety of the forest. They dared not return to Hastinapur, knowing that Duryodhan had spies and assassins lurking everywhere. Thus, the family sought refuge and began strategizing their next move. As news of the tragedy reached Hastinapur, the kingdom fell into despair. Duryodhan, faking sorrow, journeyed to Varnavat to confirm the supposed death of the Pandavas. The remains found in the charmed mansion were beyond recognition, and Duryodhan accepted them as proof of the demise of his cousins and Kunti. Meanwhile, the Pandava family fled deep into the forest. Exhausted from hunger and sleeplessness, they eventually collapsed under a banyan tree. Bhim, ever vigilant, set off to find water while the others slept soundly. Upon his return with the precious liquid, he found his family still resting. He chose a nearby rock to sit upon and keep watch over them. However, an evil demon lurking in the forest had caught the scent of human presence. The demon craved the taste of human flesh and sent his sister Hidimba to investigate. When Hidimba discovered the sleeping humans, she was instantly captivated by Bhim's formidable stature and strength. Overwhelmed by desire, she transformed into a beautiful woman and approached him. "My dear," she said, in her soft and alluring voice, "this forest is treacherous for you and your family. My brother Hidimb, the ruling demon of this land, has a particular fondness for human flesh and intends to feast on you tonight. However, I have fallen in love with you and wish to help you escape." Before Bhim could respond, a thunderous voice boomed from the depths of the forest, cutting through the air with menace. "You treacherous wench! Now you will perish alongside this human family, and I shall indulge in a grand of human and demon flesh tonight." It was Hidimba's brother, who had arrived to confront them. Chapter 15 Demon Slayer. When Hidimb observed his sister Hidimba professing her love for Bhim, rage consumed him. "You will pay for your betrayal," he snarled, seizing her arm. This act of aggression incited Bhim's fury. "Remove your hands from her, demon. Fight me instead," he declared, hurling Hidimb through the air with surprising ease. The demon was momentarily stunned by the sheer strength of this young man, who was far from an ordinary human. Bhim had been gifted to Kunti by Vayu, the wind god, endowing him with extraordinary strength from birth. This power was further amplified when he was a child, as he had consumed 8 vats of the magical potion, Rasakunda, given to him by the Naga king Vasuki. With a fierce growl, Hidimb lunged at Bhim, unleashing his full ferocity. The clash between them echoed throughout the forest, shaking the very ground and uprooting ancient trees. The thunderous noise roused the rest of the Pandava family from their deep slumber. As they prepared for the battle, they quickly realized that their intervention was unnecessary. Hidimb was of no match for Bhim. After a brief but intense struggle, Bhim seized Hidimb and lifted him high above his head, spinning him around with tremendous force before slamming him into the ground. With a few final gurgling breaths, the demon who had instilled fear in the hearts of the forest inhabitants for decades lay dead at Bhim's feet. Kunti, noticing the beautiful woman by her son, inquired, "Who are you, young lady?" "Mother, my name is Hidimba," the woman replied. "Your son has slain my brother Hidimb. He sent me to find you for his meal tonight. But I have fallen in love with your son and warned him of my brother's intentions. With your blessing, I wish to marry him." Kunti observed Bhim's pleased expression at the proposal and replied, "Very well. If my Bhim agrees, I will grant you my blessings. But on one condition: during the night, we require his great strength to protect us. He may spend his days with you until sunset." Bhim, however, added a second condition to the marriage agreement: "I will spend my days with you, but only until you bear a child. After that, I must return to my family." Hidimba accepted these terms, and thus Bhim and she began their married life together. In the mornings, Bhim would depart with Hidimba, while in the evenings, he returned to ensure the safety of his mother and brothers. Over time, Hidimba gave birth to a son, but this child was no ordinary offspring. He was destined for greatness. Chapter 16: Demon Son. When Hidimba gave birth, the unique lineage of both her and Bhim endowed their child with extraordinary traits. He grew rapidly into adulthood, emerging with a bald head, earning him the name Ghatotkach. This remarkable child inherited immense power, embodying all of his father's legendary strength and his mother's mystical abilities. The Pandava brothers took it upon themselves to train Ghatotkach, imparting their knowledge of warfare to him. He became adept in various weapons, yet he developed a particular fondness for the mace, much like his father. As the nights passed, Ghatotkach's demon powers flourished, enhancing his capabilities even further. After rigorous training, the time came for Ghatotkach to stand on his own, as the Pandavas realized they could not remain in one place for too long without risking detection from Duryodhan's spies and assassins. Before their departure, Kunti asked Ghatotkach to stay behind and watch over his mother Hidimba. Ghatotkach willingly agreed, but made a solemn promise: if ever his father or the Pandava family needed him, he would be there in an instant to provide assistance. With gratitude, the family bid him farewell and continued on their journey. As they travelled, they encountered sage Vyas, the revered grandfather of the Pandavas, who guided them to the town of Ekachakra. In this village, they disguised themselves as Brahmins, a class of priests, and took refuge with the Brahmin family. During their stay, Bhim demonstrated his might once again by confronting and slaying the fearsome demon Bakasur, thereby protecting the village from his tyranny. One day, a visiting Brahmin brought thrilling news from the kingdom of Panchal. He spoke of King Drupad, who had long harbored a desire for vengeance against Drona, the royal teacher of the arms of the Kuru dynasty. In a bid to fulfill this wish, Drupad performed a grand sacrificial ritual aimed at conjuring a son capable of defeating Drona. His prayers were answered when a powerful young man emerged from the flames of the sacred fire, named Drishtadyumna, meaning the courageous and the splendid one. But Drupad's miracle did not end there. As the flames flickered, a second figure stepped forth, a young woman whose beauty was unparalleled. Chapter 17: Daughter of Fire. Upon hearing the captivating tale of King Drupad's daughter and her remarkable birth, the Pandavas were filled with curiosity. Drupad had arranged a Swayamvar, a ceremony for selecting a groom, for his daughter Draupadi. Many Brahmins from Ekachakra planned to attend the festivities in the kingdom of Panchal, and the Pandavas, along with Kunti, decided to join this journey. It offered a chance to revisit the splendid kingdom of Panchal. After arriving into Panchal, the Pandavas enjoyed some sightseeing, while Kunti rested at their rented accommodation. The Pandava brothers made their way to the Swayamvar, mingling with the countless others who had gathered from near and far. At the grand stadium, the attendees were segregated by caste. The Pandavas, disguised as Brahmins, settled amongst the priests, while the Kshatriyas, the class of warriors, occupied the opposite side. Among these Kshatriyas were their sworn enemies, Duryodhan and Karna. As the ceremony commenced, Drishtadyumna, the brother of Draupadi, led his sister onto the stage. The crowd gasped in awe at her beauty, and the Pandava brothers were equally entranced. This Swayamvar was unlike any other, as it featured an extraordinarily challenging contest. At the top of a tall pole, a golden fish with a glass eye spun in a mesmerizing motion, while a reflective surface was placed at the bottom of the pole. To win Draupadi's hand, suitors would have to lift an exceedingly heavy bow, string it, and shoot an arrow to strike the fish's eye, all while aiming at the reflection in the water below. King Drupad had intentionally designed such a difficult task, harboring a secret hope for a son-in-law with exceptional skills of Arjun. However, he thought Arjun had supposedly perished along with his family in the fire at Varnavat, leading Drupad to settle for a suitor who could at least demonstrate a fraction of Arjun's prowess. As the crowd observed, murmurs of disbelief rippled through the assembled nobles. Many princes, kings, and renowned warriors made their attempts one by one, but all failed miserably against the daunting challenge. As per some versions, eventually Karna, the close ally of Duryodhan, stepped forward, igniting whispers amongst the spectators. Despite Duryodhan's bestowal of a kingdom upon him, Karna was the adopted son of a charioteer, placing him in the Shudra class, traditionally viewed as laborers. With determination, Karna picked up the bow, but before he could take aim, Draupadi's voice rang out, loud and clear, "I will not wed a Shudra." Her words stung like a dagger, inciting a furious reaction with Karna, who felt the heat of humiliation wash over him, as if the sun itself were echoing his wrath. Nevertheless, he maintained his composure and set the bow down without attempting to shoot. This story, although very popular, is not present in the Ved Vyasa's Mahabharata. One after the other, everyone failed. As the crowd fell into a silence tinged with disbelief, it appeared that no other noble dared to challenge the difficult task. However, amidst the tension, a young Brahmin stepped forward to make his attempt, prompting gasps of astonishment amongst the onlookers. A Brahmin attempting what no Kshatriya had succeeded in? It was ludicrous. This young man, however, was none other than Arjun in disguise. Chapter 18 Victory. The crowd looked on in disbelief as the young Brahmin stepped forward to attempt the seemingly impossible task of shooting the eye of a revolving fish. So many Kshatriyas, the warrior class, had failed before him. The notion that a Brahmin, a member of the priestly class, could succeed where esteemed warriors had faltered was almost laughable. With surprising ease, the young man strung the bow, displaying a mastery of the weapon that went against his peaceful appearance. As he focused on the moving target in the reflective pool, he steadied his breath and released the arrow. It soared through the air, striking the eye of the golden fish with precision. The crowd fell into hushed silence. Astonishment etched on every face. The Kshatriya, including kings and princes, were left in shock, struggling to comprehend what they had just witnessed. Disbelief quickly morphed into anger, and a murmur began to rise among the warriors. "This must be a trick. Drupad has brought us here to mock us. There's no way a Brahmin boy could outshine us in a battle." The tension escalated, transforming the crowd into a mob. "Kill Drupad! Burn his daughter!" came the shouts from the agitated Kshatriyas as they surged towards the royal family, weapons drawn. With the situation spiraling out of control, Arjun, still disguised as a Brahmin, swiftly reloaded his bow, ready to defend against the onslaught. He dispatched the approaching mob with remarkable ease, neutralizing the threat. Karna observed the unfolding chaos with keen interest, convinced that the Brahmin's victory was merely a stroke of luck. In a fit of rage and jealousy, he loosed a volley of arrows aimed at the young warrior. However, Arjun, adept at the art of archery, countered all of Karna's attacks effortlessly. The skill displayed by the Brahmin astonished Karna, who found himself barely able to deflect Arjun's return fire. Shocked by the extraordinary prowess before him, Karna, for the first time, felt a twinge of fear. "Who are you, young Brahmin? Are you Lord Vishnu or Indra in disguise? I have never encountered a warrior with such remarkable skill," he asked, awe evident in his voice. In a voice altered to conceal his identity, Arjun replied, "My Guru has imparted me all the knowledge of warfare. You are no match for me, Karna. Beware." For the first time in his life, Karna faced a warrior who made him hesitate. Other formidable Kshatriyas, including the exceptionally strong Shalya, joined the fray, but they were swiftly dealt with by Bhim. As the fight escalated, Arjun's brothers rallied to his side, supported by Brahmins from the crowd. The chaos drove many spectators away from the stadium to avoid the danger. Yet, those who remained were left bewildered, questioning the true identities of the mysterious Brahmins. Amongst the onlookers, however, one individual recognized the Pandavas despite their disguises. He was none other than Lord Krishna, the nephew of Kunti and the cousins to the Pandavas. In that moment, he understood the significance of the events unfolding before him. Chapter 19. The Five Husbands. Once the commotion subsided, Draupadi completed the Swayamvar by garlanding Arjun, the victorious Brahmin, and accepting him as her husband. The outcome left Drupad perplexed. A Brahmin succeeding in such a challenging archery contest was indeed an anomaly. Intrigued, Drupad instructed his son Drishtadyumna to investigate the circumstances surrounding this unexpected turn of events. After leaving the stadium, the Pandavas, still in disguise, escorted Draupadi to their rented home in Panchal. As they approached, Arjun playfully called out, "Mother, look what I have brought home." Kunti, who was absorbed in her prayers, responded without turning, "Whatever it might be, make sure to share it equally with your brothers." When she finally turned to see Draupadi, realization dawned on her, and horror washed over her face. She had mistakenly believed Arjun had returned with food for their evening meal. Now they faced a dilemma. To uphold dharma, righteousness, and proper conduct, Kunti's words had to be honored. Turning to Yudhishthir, known for his wisdom and sense of justice, Kunti sought guidance. However, before he could respond, Draupadi reassured her, "Mother, do not worry. The situation was preordained. After my birth from the flames, Sage Vyas visited me and revealed insights into my past. In my previous life, I underwent great penance to seek a boon from Lord Shiva. I desired a husband who embodies dharma and justice. I wished for a man who possessed the strength of Lord Hanuman, the archery skills of Lord Parshuram, the wisdom of Lord Brihaspati, and unparalleled beauty of Nakul. Lord Shiva informed me that such qualities could not be contained within a single mortal, as that would disrupt the natural order. Yet, I insisted on my request 5 times, and eventually he granted my wish. Now I understand how the Lord has fulfilled my desire." Just then, a knock at the door interrupted their conversation. It was Lord Krishna, along with his brother Balaram. Krishna had recognized the Pandavas at the Swayamvar and came to pay respects to his aunt Kunti and his cousins. The family welcomed them with joy, and Kunti recounted the events that had unfolded. Lord Krishna assured them that Draupadi's marriage was indeed in accordance with dharma. He explained, in addition to Lord Shiva's blessing, the 5 Pandava brothers shared a singular soul. They are all incarnations of the Devas. This revelation brought comfort to Kunti, and they began to discuss how to break the news of marriage to King Drupad. However, unbeknownst to them, their conversation was not as private as they believed. Hiding outside the home, Drishtadyumna had overheard everything, and he was now burdened with the knowledge of the Pandavas' true identities and Draupadi's extraordinary circumstances. Chapter 20. The Divided Kingdom. The news of the Pandavas' survival spread swiftly throughout Hastinapur, reaching the ears of King Dhritarashtra and his son Duryodhan. Now that the Pandava brothers had allied themselves with King Drupad's families, they found refuge within the kingdom of Panchal. This alliance unsettled both Dhritarashtra and Duryodhan. With Yudhishthir now an adult, the throne of Hastinapur rightfully belonged to him as the eldest son of King Pandu, while Dhritarashtra served merely as a caretaker king. The revelation that Duryodhan had orchestrated the failed assassination of the Pandavas became an open secret, and in a secretive council with Karna, Duryodhan plotted a potential attack on Panchal to seize the kingdom and eliminate the Pandavas. However, to wage open war, they required approval of grandfather Bhishma and Prime Minister Vidur. Bhishma and Vidur quickly dismissed Duryodhan's absurd scheme. They recognized that the throne should pass to Yudhishthir. To maintain peace, they proposed a compromise. The kingdom should be divided, with half ruled by Yudhishthir and the other half by Duryodhan. Though grudgingly Dhritarashtra consented, granting Yudhishthir the region of Khandavprasth, the Pandavas accepted these terms, and Yudhishthir began his reign over the land. Under his kingship, which symbolized justice, truth, and moral duty, the region flourished, leading to the establishment of a new capital named Indraprasth. One day, the Pandavas received a visit from sage Narad, who delivered a foreboding warning. He cautioned them that having Draupadi as their common wife could foster divisions amongst the brothers, presenting a significant threat to their kingdom. Following the sage's counsel, Draupadi and her husbands agreed upon a pact. If any brother entered Draupadi's chambers while she was with another, the intruding brother would be required to spend 12 years in exile. Soon after, a priest came to Arjun in distress, pleading for help as robbers were stealing his cattle. Time was of the essence, and to assist the priest, Arjun needed to act quickly. However, he realized that his weapons were in Draupadi's chamber. Understanding his duty as the protector of people, Arjun made the hasty decision to enter the chamber and retrieve his weapons, despite Draupadi being with Yudhishthir at the moment. Although Arjun swiftly dealt with the thieves and returned victorious, he now faced the repercussions of breaking the agreement he had made with his brothers and Draupadi. The conflict between duty and the terms of their pact loomed ominously over their shared lives. Chapter 21 Exile. Upon returning from defeating the robbers, Arjun was fully prepared to accept the consequences of his actions. His brothers, Yudhishthir and the others, urged him to reconsider, but Arjun was resolute. He understood that the penalty for his breach of their agreement was 12 years of exile, and so he departed from his kingdom. His journey took him across lakes and into the dense forests until he finally reached the source of the sacred river Ganga. One morning, while Arjun was bathing and performing his morning rituals in the river, a powerful force suddenly pulled him underwater and transported him into the kingdom of Kauravya. There he encountered the Naga princess Ulupi, who had been captivated by him. She confessed her love. "O prince, I beheld you as you entered the water, and I have fallen in love with you. I am unmarried and I long for a child. Please grant me this wish, and I shall reward you abundantly." Though initially taken aback and hesitant, Arjun found himself enchanted by her beauty and charm. In time, he married Ulupi, and she bore him a son named Iravan. After some time, Arjun felt the need to continue his journey. Ulupi bestowed upon him the ability to conquer any amphibious creature and assured him of invincibility in water. Grateful for her gifts, Arjun resumed his pilgrimage, visiting numerous holy sites, descending the Himalayan slopes, traversing the Mahendra mountains, and journeying along the coast until he arrived in Manipur. In Manipur, Arjun was graciously received by the king Chitravahana, who had a single child, a daughter named Chitrangada. She was not only renowned for her beauty, but was also a trained warrior. Captivated by her, Arjun sought the king's permission to marry her. King Chitravahana agreed, but with the stipulation that their son would remain in Manipur and inherit the throne. Arjun accepted the condition, and a grand wedding took place between him and Chitrangada. Years passed in Manipur, and after the birth of their son, whom they named Babruvahana, Arjun felt compelled to continue his journey once more. He departed from the kingdom, leaving behind a legacy that would ensure his son's future as king. Arjun then travelled south to the oceans, where he spent time with ascetics. During his stay, the ascetics informed him that they had abandoned 5 ponds in their vicinity due to the ferocious crocodiles inhabiting them. Undeterred, Arjun visited the first pond to bathe. However, he was suddenly seized by a giant crocodile. With great strength, he wrestled the creature and threw it onto the dry land. To his astonishment, as soon as the crocodile landed, it transformed into a stunning woman. She revealed to Arjun that she and her 4 companions were celestial beings, cursed to live as crocodiles until a mighty prince could rescue them. With determination, Arjun freed the other 4 maidens from their watery prison, and in gratitude, they returned to the heavens. Continuing his odyssey, Arjun eventually arrived at Prabhas, where he was joyfully greeted by a dear friend, marking another chapter in his extraordinary journey. Chapter 22 Dwarka. The news of Arjun's impending arrival at Prabhas reached Lord Krishna, who eagerly set out to greet the mighty prince. Their meeting was filled with joy, after which they travelled together to the city of Dwarka. As they approached, the citizens of Dwarka gathered in large numbers, filled with excitement to catch a glimpse of the renowned Arjun. He was welcomed warmly, and during his extended stay in Krishna's palace, he became acquainted with the beauty of the city. One day, Arjun's gaze fell upon a striking woman who instantly captured his heart. Lord Krishna, observing this blossoming affection, recognized the woman as Subhadra, his own half-sister, and he approved of Arjun's interest. Eager to win her hand, Arjun sought counsel from Lord Krishna. The Lord revealed that a Swayamvar, a ceremony for a bride to choose her groom, was being planned for Subhadra. However, Krishna advised caution, noting that the outcome of such events were always uncertain. Given Arjun's status as a Kshatriya, Krishna suggested that he might consider abducting her, a method that was traditionally acceptable among warriors. He recounted how their grandfather Bhishma had secured the hands of Princesses Ambika and Ambalika through a similar means. With this strategy in mind, during a religious ceremony dedicated to the king of the mountains, Subhadra circled the mountain in prayer and was preparing to return to Dwarka. Seizing the moment, Arjun charged forth, swiftly lifting Subhadra onto his chariot and racing away with her. The princess's guards were caught off guard, unable to intercept the fleeing princess. Meanwhile, the elders of the Yadava clan were incensed by Arjun's bold act. Balaram, Subhadra's brother, quickly assembled a formidable army with the intention of recapturing the rogue prince. However, he was curious about Lord Krishna's silence on the matter. "What are your thoughts on this situation, Krishna?" Balaram inquired. Krishna replied with calm authority, stating, "Arjun is the most esteemed among Kshatriya princes. There is no better match for Subhadra. Should you pursue him, the mighty Arjun would surely humiliate your forces. Instead, heed my counsel, accept this union, and bring Arjun and Subhadra back to Dwarka, where they can be married with all due ceremony befitting a royal couple." Calmed by Krishna's wise counsel, Balaram and the elders reconsidered their approach. They welcomed Arjun and Subhadra back to Dwarka, where a splendid marriage ceremony took place, honoring their union. After spending a year in Dwarka with Subhadra, Arjun prepared to return to Khandavprasth. As he journeyed back, he pondered the potential reaction of his first wife, Draupadi, upon learning of his new marriages. The prospect of returning home with Subhadra weighed heavily on his mind, as he anticipated the complexities that lay ahead. Chapter 23 Return to Indraprasth. Upon Arjun's return to Indraprasth, with Subhadra as his new wife, the atmosphere was tense. Draupadi, though devoted to all her husbands, felt a deep disappointment. Arjun held a particularly cherished place in her heart, making Subhadra's presence difficult to accept initially. Recognizing the potential friction, Subhadra approached Draupadi with a respectful demeanor. She humbly apologized for any distress caused by Arjun's actions and vowed to do everything within her power to make amends. Draupadi, touched by Subhadra's sincerity, began to soften. Over time, she forgave both Arjun and Subhadra, welcoming them into her life. A bond of friendship blossomed between Draupadi and Subhadra, which was further strengthened by arrival of Subhadra's son, Abhimanyu. Abhimanyu quickly won the affection of his uncle Krishna and inherited the warrior spirit of his lineage, trained diligently under each of the Pandava brothers, becoming a skilled warrior in his own right. Meanwhile, Draupadi also gave birth to 5 sons: Prativindya, Sutasoma, Shrutakarma, Satanik, and Shrutasena. Together, they were known as the Upapandavas, and their presence added to the happiness of the household. Krishna maintained a close friendship with Arjun, frequently visiting Indraprasth to share in their joys. One day, as Krishna and Arjun strolled along the river bank, they were approached by a Brahmin seeking assistance. "What help do you require?" Arjun inquired. The Brahmin expressed his dire hunger, revealing that it could only be quenched by consuming the Khandav forest and everything within it. To their astonishment, the Brahmin revealed himself to be Agni, the god of fire. He explained that the Khandav forest had become a refuge for thieves and murderers over the years. Agni had attempted to incinerate the forest multiple times, but each time Indra, the king of gods, intervened, sending down rain to anguish the flames. Understanding the gravity of the situation, Arjun and Krishna agreed to aid Agni in his quest. Arjun said, "However, to confront Indra, we will need special weapons." In response, Agni summoned the god of water, who graciously bestowed upon Arjun the Gandiv, the most powerful bow in existence, along with 2 inexhaustible quivers filled with arrows. Additionally, he provided Arjun with a magnificent golden chariot drawn by 4 white horses. To Lord Krishna, he granted the Sudarshan Chakra, a divine discus capable of slicing through anything. With their divine armament secured, Agni ignited the Khandav forest, setting it ablaze. However, it wasn't long before Indra became aware of the fire and the imminent challenge to his authority. Chapter 24: The Fire God. In a radiant form, Agni, the fire god, unleashed his fury upon the Khandav forest, determined to consume it entirely. Indra, the king of the gods, had sworn to protect this forest due to his friendship with the Naga Takshak and his clan, who made it their home amongst its trees. In an effort to thwart Agni's advances, Indra sent down torrents of rain to extinguish the flames. However, Agni was safeguarded by Arjun and Lord Krishna, who had equipped themselves with celestial weapons. With his mighty Gandiva bow, Arjun unleashed thousands of arrows, skillfully deflecting the rain and ensuring that Agni could continue his fiery feast. Lord Krishna further fortified their position by blocking access to the forest, enabling Agni to devour the forest without interruption. In retaliation, a furious Indra summoned a violent storm, unleashing billowing clouds and howling winds that momentarily rendered Arjun unconscious. This brief lapse allowed some of the forest creatures to escape. Upon regaining his senses, Arjun swiftly aimed his arrows at Indra, who responded with thunder and lightning. In the face of this onslaught, Arjun invoked a powerful mantra and unleashed the Vayava missile, which dispelled the dark clouds overhead. With the sun shining down once again, Agni was free to continue his burning feast. Indra, further enraged by Agni's unchecked consumption, intensified his assault, summoning a multitude of gods to directly confront Agni's protectors. Yet, the combined strength of Arjun and Krishna proved overwhelming, causing Indra's divine allies to scatter in fear. Undeterred, Indra pressed on alone, but suddenly he heard a celestial voice proclaim, "The Khandav forest is destined to burn. Know that Krishna and Prince Arjun are invincible. Turn back and return to your abode." Acknowledging the power of the prophecy, Indra withdrew, while Arjun and Krishna erupted in triumph roars of victory. As Agni relished the last of his feast, a mysterious figure emerged from the forest, racing towards Arjun. "Protect me, dear prince, save me," the figure cried out. Arjun, compassionate and brave, granted the Asura asylum, allowing him to escape the devastation. With the Khandav forest reduced to ashes, Agni completed his meal. Indra returned to pay his respects to Krishna and Arjun, clearly impressed by Arjun's formidable skills. As a token of gratitude, Indra offered Arjun a boon, promising him to grant whatever he desired. It was then that the Asura Arjun had rescued introduced himself. I am Mayasur, the architect of the Asuras. I also wish to serve you in some way. Arjun, recognizing the value of Mayasur's talents, directed his wish towards Krishna. What is your wish, my lord? Mayasur inquired Krishna. Krishna, with a knowing smile, replied, construct a palace for Yudhishthir, one that will leave all who see it in awe.
Chapter 25 Palace of Illusions.
In gratitude for being rescued by Prince Arjun and at the behest of Lord Krishna, Mayasur, the illustrious architect of the Asuras, commenced the construction of a magnificent palace for King Yudhishthir. This architectural marvel, named Maya Sabha, was renowned for its breathtaking illusionary design. The walls of the palace were adorned with precious jewels and gems, while the floors created an enchanting illusion of flowing water. In other areas, pools appear to be solid ground, further enhancing the palace's mesmerizing quality. The palace featured walls that seemed to contain doors, only for them to be mere illusions, while other walls, which appeared smooth and seamless, concealed actual doors that were invisible to the eye. Such wonders attracted special guests and dignitaries from far and wide, who came to marvel at the splendor of Maya Sabha. One day, sage Narad visited Yudhishthir, bringing with him important news. He informed the king of the unfulfilled wish of his father, King Pandu. Before his passing, Pandu had intended to perform the Rajasuya Yagya, a great ritual that would have established him as the sovereign king of all Kshatriyas, effectively making him the king of the world. Unfortunately, he had died before he could realize this ambition. As the eldest son, it now fell to Yudhishthir to fulfill his father's dream. Sage Narad advised him that it was the opportune moment to begin preparations for the grand ceremony. Despite the sage's counsel, Yudhishthir found himself in a state of conflict. To perform the Rajasuya Yagya, he would require the support of all other Kshatriyas, kings, princes, and leaders from various realms. Seeking guidance, he approached Lord Krishna. You are qualified for this position, Yudhishthir, said Krishna. You are wise and a just king. However, there is one who will stand in your way, King Jarasandha of Magad. He will attempt to obstruct the Yagya. Having conquered many kingdoms, he has imprisoned 99 Kshatriyas, whom he intends to sacrifice to his deity. Many of the other Kshatriyas support him out of fear. What do you propose we do in this situation, O Lord? Yudhishthir asked, eager for a solution. Jarasandha must be defeated and the imprisoned kings freed. Arjun, Bhim, and I will journey to Magad and challenge him to a duel with one of us. Jarasandha's great ego will compel him to choose Bhim, and Bhim shall surely defeat him in a combat. Reluctantly, Yudhishthir agreed, and the trio set forth towards Magad. Upon their arrival, they quickly caught the attention of Jarasandha, who demanded to know the reason for their presence. Lord Krishna boldly addressed him, We come to inform you of Yudhishthir's intention to perform Rajasuya Yagya. You are the only obstacle standing in his way. Your imprisonment of the kings violates all principles of dharma, and thus you must be defeated. We challenge you to combat, and you may choose any one of us as your opponent. True to Krishna's prediction, Jarasandha's immense pride led him to select Bhim for the challenge. The battle commenced and raged on for 13 cruel days. Throughout the contest, Bhim demonstrated his strength, repeatedly lifting Jarasandha high above his head and slamming him down to the ground. Yet, despite the relentless assault, Jarasandha always managed to recover and continued the fight. Eventually, in a climactic moment, Bhim seized Jarasandha by feet and with a fierce display of strength tore him into two. However, even his brutal act did not conclude the battle, for Jarasandha harbored a secret that would soon come to light. Chapter 26 King of Kings. King Jarasandha's birth was marked by an extraordinary twist of fate. He came into the world in two halves. In a dark act of magic, a demoness stitched the two halves together, endowing Jarasandha with a near invincibility in battle. During the fierce contest with Bhim, when Bhim tore him apart, he did so along the magical seam that held him together. As Bhim turned to walk away, believing the fight was over, he was met with a maniacal laugh that sent chill down his spine. The dark magic binding Jarasandha's half was still potent, and he recovered from Bhima's devastating attack, ready to continue the battle. Frustrated and at a loss for how to proceed, Bhim sought guidance from Lord Krishna. In a moment of clarity, Lord Krishna plucked a leaf from a nearby tree, split it in half, and tossed the pieces in opposite directions. Understanding Krishna's signal, Bhim acted decisively. He seized Jarasandha once more, this time tearing him apart and throwing the right side to the left and left side to the right. This strategic move shattered the dark magic that had sustained Jarasandha, and he was finally defeated. With Jarasandha vanquished, Lord Krishna, Arjun, and Bhim took control of Magad. They liberated the kings who had been imprisoned by Jarasandha, and the freed kings expressed their profound gratitude. They pledged their support to Yudhishthir in his quest to become the world king. Recognizing the need for stability in Magad, Lord Krishna appointed Jarasandha's son, Sahadev, as the new king. Unlike his father, Sahadev was wise and just, promising to be a righteous ruler who would also support Yudhishthir. With the pieces of the puzzle now firmly in place, Yudhishthir moved forward with the Rajasuya Yagya. The grand ceremony attracted hundreds of kings, including King Dhritarashtra, his son Duryodhan, grandfather Bhishma, Guru Drona, and the rest of the Kauravas. The rituals unfolded over several days, with Brahmins meticulously performing sacred rites. During the Rajasuya Yagya, kings and representatives from various regions gathered to pay homage to Yudhishthir, acknowledging his supremacy and offering gifts as a token of their acceptance of him as the world king. However, the ceremony was not without its challenges. King Shishupal, a cousin to both the Pandavas and Lord Krishna, posed a significant threat. Cursed by the sage Durvasa in his youth, Shishupal was destined to meet his end after committing 100 heinous acts. Fueled by jealousy and hatred for Lord Krishna, he continuously insulted and berated Krishna throughout the festivities. As Shishupal crossed the threshold of 100 offences, Lord Krishna unleashed the Sudarshan Chakra, the divine discus, swiftly beheading Shishupal. This act fulfilled the curse and brought an end to Shishupal's transgressions, marking a dramatic turn in the proceedings. As the Rajasuya Yagya came to a close after days of joyous festivities and rituals, the final ceremonies were performed and blessings were bestowed. The participating kings and rulers departed, having recognized Yudhishthir's rightful supremacy. Yet, Duryodhan lingered in the palace, consumed by admiration for its beauty and craftsmanship. Within him, however, envy festered, igniting a deep-seated hatred that would soon propel him towards dark intentions. Chapter 27. The Insult. Following the conclusion of the Rajasuya Yagya, Duryodhan, accompanied by his uncle Shakuni, lingered in the Pandavas' magnificent palace for a while longer. As he wandered through Maya Sabha, he was awestruck by its beauty, yet with each passing moment, his jealousy and hatred for the Pandavas grew. The palace, renowned for its illusions, displayed areas that appeared as flowing water, only to be solid floors, and vice versa. In his distracted admiration, Duryodhan was deceived by one such illusion, and fell into a pool that he believed was a solid floor. Draupadi, who watched from an adjoining chamber, could not contain her laughter and exclaimed, "A blind son like the blind father." Her words struck deep, igniting a profound sense of embarrassment in Duryodhan that quickly morphed into fury. Although this is the most popular version of the story, according to the real Ved Vyas Mahabharat, Draupadi was not even there on the spot. Duryodhan was mocked and laughed by the younger Pandava brothers. On their journey back to Hastinapur, Duryodhan confided in his uncle Shakuni about the humiliation he had suffered. Upon their return, Duryodhan and Shakuni sought the counsel of King Dhritarashtra, the blind ruler of Hastinapur. Duryodhan recounted the mocking words, and the king's face contorted with anger. His blindness had cast a shadow over his claim to the throne, which has instead passed to his younger brother Pandu and subsequently to the Pandavas. Despite his physical limitations, Dhritarashtra had governed Hastinapur effectively since Pandu's death, but the desire to see his son Duryodhan ascend the power burned fiercely within him. He felt that the entire kingdom rightfully belonged to Duryodhan, and he listened intently as Shakuni and Duryodhan devised a scheme to reclaim their lost kingdom and the wealth that Pandavas had acquired. Dhritarashtra's interest piqued, but he expressed some reservations about their plan. "I must seek the counsel of the wise Vidur," he said. Duryodhan quickly countered, "Vidur is an ally of the Pandavas, father. He will surely oppose our plans." Shakuni interjected with a cunning proposal. "We will build a magnificent hall in Hastinapur to rival the Pandavas' palace. As a part of your coronation celebrations, we will host a gambling match. I shall place the wagers and I will play on behalf of Duryodhan." Duryodhan nodded, his anger shifting to determination as Shakuni outlined the strategy. "If you invite Yudhishthir, by Kshatriya honor, he will have no choice but to accept. Furthermore, as a warrior, he must agree to the challenge of the game. With your blessing, Uncle Shakuni can help us regain our stolen kingdom." Thus, fueled by resentment and ambition, Duryodhan and Shakuni set their plan into motion, laying the groundwork for a confrontation that would change the fate of their families forever. Chapter 28: A Game of Dice. Despite his strong objections, Prime Minister Vidur found himself compelled to deliver an invitation to King Yudhishthir. Having tried to dissuade King Dhritarashtra from participating in the proposed gambling game, Vidur faced resistance as the blind king was easily influenced by his ambitious son Duryodhan. Upon receiving the invitation to the coronation at Hastinapur, Yudhishthir sensed the underlying malice in the scheme concocted by his uncle and cousin. He confided in Draupadi and his brothers about his concerns. Yet, bound by Kshatriya honor, he felt obligated to accept the invitation. There was another, more personal reason that swayed him. Over the years, Yudhishthir had developed a fondness for gambling. The thrill of the game provided a welcome distraction from the burdens of kingship, and he believed in his ability to emerge victorious. Thus, Yudhishthir accepted the invitation, and together with Draupadi and his brothers, he made the journey to Hastinapur. Upon arrival, he quickly noticed that the newly constructed hall of the Kuru dynasty paled in comparison to the grandeur of Maya Sabha, the Pandavas' own palace. The craftsmen had misled the blind king about the materials and finishes used in the construction. Once the coronation ceremony concluded, the gambling match commenced as a part of the evening festivities. Duryodhan established the rules. He would stake the wagers, while his uncle Shakuni would play on his behalf. The game attracted an audience of esteemed guests, including King Dhritarashtra, grandfather Bhishma, Prime Minister Vidur, the Pandava brothers, and the rest of the Kauravas, along with Karna and Duryodhan's close allies. Draupadi, feeling the weight of the moment, retreated to her chambers. As the elder of the Pandavas and the guest king, Yudhishthir insisted on playing the game himself. The game of dice commenced with Duryodhan making the first wager of 1,000 horses. Both Yudhishthir and Shakuni rolled the dice, and all eyes were on the outcome. "I win!" Shakuni exclaimed. But unbeknownst to Yudhishthir, Shakuni had rigged the game with enchanted dice that ensured his victory. With each round, Duryodhan raised the stakes further: 10,000 servants, 100,000 soldiers, 300,000 chariots. Every time the dice were cast, Shakuni's triumphant declaration of "I win" echoed through the hall. In the feverish pursuit to recoup his losses, Yudhishthir clung to the hope that fortune might eventually favor him. Meanwhile, the Kauravas revelled in their wins, cheering loudly with each victory. In stark contrast, the Pandava brothers remained silent, their concern growing with each passing moment. Prime Minister Vidur, witnessing the unfolding disaster, implored King Dhritarashtra to end the game, because as the host, it was only the king who had the authority to halt the proceedings. But he was not only blind to the physical world, but also to the deceit and wickedness of his son. With each roll of dice, he eagerly anticipated the results, quietly rejoicing in Duryodhan's victories, unaware that the worst was yet to come. Chapter 29. The Humiliation of Draupadi. Yudhishthir found himself hopelessly enmeshed in the feverish excitement of the gambling match. Shakuni had skillfully identified and exploited the young king's vulnerability, while Duryodhan ruthlessly capitalized on their ill-gotten fortune. Within just a few rounds of the game, Yudhishthir had lost not only his kingdom but all his wealth to the Kauravas. Yet, Duryodhan's insatiable hatred for the Pandavas drove him to push further. "You have lost everything, Yudhishthir," Duryodhan taunted, "but you still have a chance to reclaim your kingdom and home. Stake your brothers, and you may play another round." The noble king, now a mere shadow of his former self, agreed to the provocation. "I agree. I wager my brothers." Another round commenced, and once again Shakuni's voice rang out. "I win." Duryodhan pressed his advantage, urging, "Wager yourself, Yudhishthir. Perhaps you can win your brothers back." The dice were rolled once more, and once again Shakuni announced, "I win." At last, Duryodhan declared, "You are now our slave, Yudhishthir. You have just one possession left. Wager your wife, Draupadi, and you may win freedom for yourself and your brothers." Cold sweat trickled down Yudhishthir's face as he felt the weight of the moment. As if entranced, he uttered, "I agree. I stake Draupadi, the foremost amongst all women." The dice were cast again, and once more Shakuni's voice echoed, "I win." With a triumphant roar, Duryodhan exclaimed, "Vidur, bring Draupadi down to the court. She is now our maid." Vidur, having witnessed the degradation unfold with mounting disgust, interjected, "It seems my counsel is no longer required in this court, Duryodhan. I resign my position. I will have no further involvement in this sinful behavior." However, Duryodhan, intoxicated by victory, paid little heed to Vidur's defiance. "Brother Dushasan, go to Draupadi's chambers and bring her here," Duryodhan commanded. Dushasan eagerly complied and rushed to Draupadi's quarters. She was settling down for the night when he barged in, startling her. "What is the meaning of this?" she exclaimed in fright. "Your husband has lost his kingdom, his brothers, himself, and you in the gambling match. Your presence is commanded in court." "You are our slave," Dushasan replied mockingly. Draupadi was taken aback, her confusion quickly transforming into fury. "What sin has my husband committed to wager me in this match? Did he lose himself before staking me?" she demanded. Dushasan, however, was not in the mood for dialogue. He seized Draupadi by the hair and dragged her towards the court. Meanwhile, the Kauravas revelled in their apparent victory, their glee palpable in the air. Karna, seizing the moment to avenge his past grievances against Draupadi, proclaimed, "She is our slave, strip her naked." With a malicious delight, Dushasan obeyed, grasping Draupadi's garment and beginning to pull it from her. The court echoed with cheers from the Kauravas' side, their hearts filled with vindictive joy as they sought to humiliate the noble queen. Chapter 30. The Divine Intervention. Draupadi found herself ensnared in a harrowing nightmare. Her husband Yudhishthir, caught in the fever of gambling, had lost not only his kingdom and wealth, but also his brothers, himself, and their common wife. Dushasan had dragged her into the court by her hair, igniting her indignation. "What is the meaning of this? Have you no shame? Will the elders of the court not defend me?" she pleaded. Grandfather Bhishma, bound by honor to uphold the throne of Hastinapur, found himself powerless to intervene. The blind king Dhritarashtra was a mere puppet, enslaved to the ambitions of his sons. Draupadi's husbands had fallen into the Kauravas' grasp according to the dharmic rules of gambling, and the situation grew more dire with every passing moment. Karna, who had long harbored resentment towards Draupadi since her rebuke during the Swayamvar, seized the opportunity to humiliate her further. Karna declared with a cruel smile, "She is no longer a royalty, strip her naked, and she can join the servants in their quarters." Duryodhan, delighting in the unfolding chaos, eagerly agreed, tapping his thigh in lustful anticipation as he leered at Draupadi. As Dushasan began to pull at Draupadi's garment, unraveling it from her body, she fervently prayed for help. In that moment, Lord Krishna's grace filled the room, enveloping her in divine protection. To the astonishment of everyone present, no matter how much Dushasan tugged at her clothing, it seemed there was no end to the fabric unrolling from her. After hours, exhausted, he eventually collapsed, unable to continue. At this critical juncture, Bhim, who had been bound by dharmic law to accept the actions of his elder brother and the Kaurava elders, awoke from his stupor. Unable to contain his fury any longer, he erupted. "Dushasan, you vile creature, I vow to crack open your chest on the battlefield and wash Draupadi's hair with your blood. This I swear, or else I vow never to enter the heavens." Bhim's fearsome oath sent shockwaves throughout the court, rousing King Dhritarashtra to take action. Finally, recognizing the depth of the evil he had been supporting all this while, Dhritarashtra said, "This is wrong. No, we have made a grave error. What have we done?" With a heavy heart, Dhritarashtra nullified the results of the game, restoring the kingdom to Yudhishthir and granting the Pandavas their freedom. Relieved, the Pandavas and Draupadi departed Hastinapur without delay. However, Duryodhan was seething with rage at his father's decision. "Father, we had them. We had everything we desired. Now the Pandavas will return to their kingdom and raise their armies against us. We are doomed." The blind king, now uncertain and confused about his actions, looked to his son for direction. "What shall we do, Duryodhan?" he asked. Duryodhan's eyes gleamed with a newfound resolve. "Send out the guards. Order Yudhishthir to return for another match of dice. This time, the stakes will be different." With that sinister plan taking shape, the stage was set for further treachery.